Flipping the elementary classroom, ideas for doing an in-class flip with young learners. This presentation is by Allie Lederer, a first grade teacher at Joppaview Elementary, and Jess Weaver, another first grade teacher at Joppaview. What is a flipped classroom? We're all used to seeing the traditional classroom on the left, where you give a lecture during the day and then the homework is practice for the skill that they learned. With a flipped classroom, the lecture is actually given as homework via video or screencast, and then the following day's class time is spent practicing the skill that they learned at home. With young students, it's difficult to assign that type of homework, and it's hard to hold students accountable for learning a skill all on their own at home. So for these students, you can do an in-class flip. And an in-class flip is where students still watch the lecture as a video or screencast, but instead of watching it at home as homework, you fit it into the school day at some other point before you get to that lesson. So I'm going to be showing you a few examples of how you can do an in-class flip with your students. Why would you want to flip a lesson or a classroom? With a flipped lesson, you spend a lot less time in whole group with the teacher, with the students listening to the teacher, and a lot more time with students practicing a skill and talking to each other, and the teacher being more of a facilitator. I know at Joppaview this past year we really worked hard to spend a lot less time in whole group and a lot more time with small groups so that we can differentiate with the small groups and give the students what they really need. So there's 3 different ways that I've been using an in-class flip in my classroom. I'm going to briefly go over how to use directions in modeling and stations, and then I will go more in depth as to morning work and how you can use morning work with an in-class flip. So I don't know about you, but I spend a lot of my day giving directions and modeling an activity for my students to do. So I realized if I give the directions as a screencast or video, it saves me a lot of time in the school day. So what I started doing is making screencasts and videos of myself reading directions for an activity or modeling an activity for the students. And the students would watch it on their own time. And if they missed a part or they forgot a part of the directions, all they had to do was go back in the video and rewatch the part that they missed. So it really saved me at least 10 extra minutes in a lesson that I didn't have to spend giving directions or repeating them. The students could just go back to the video and watch it again. So with stations, especially in math, we use stations a lot in first grade. You can incorporate a flipped lesson as one of the stations. So you see here an example is how 4 stations might look in my classroom. 2 of the stations would be practicing the skill that we're working on. One of the stations would be the flip station, and then the other one will be teacher time. So with the flip station, that's the station where the students would watch that lecture video or screencast. That's where they essentially get the whole group instruction by watching the video, so that when they get to you for teacher time, they're ready to practice the skill, or some students might need to reteach. Whatever the students needed at that time, you can give them. But they've already gotten the lecture part as the flip station. With morning work, in my classroom, each morning we have about 20 to 25 minutes to spend on journal and morning work. So some days, if I want to do a flipped lesson, instead of with a traditional flipped lesson, you would give the lecture as homework. Instead of doing that, I would give it as morning work. So sometimes our morning work was to either watch a video, or I made a screencast, or I had the students watch or read a PowerPoint, something that delivers the lecture to them on their own without me teaching it in whole group. So in this particular lesson, it's a math lesson on counting nickels. So I used the morning work to flip the lesson. That morning, this is the morning work that the students did. They were asked to read through a PowerPoint that teaches them all about nickels and how to count nickels, and complete the worksheet you see on the left. At the top of the worksheet, I put directions for how the students can get to the PowerPoint on the student drive. And then after they read through the PowerPoint, they had to write down 2 things they learned about the nickel. And if they still had any questions, they recorded a question that they still have. Once we got to the lesson time for math, I started off with a pre-assessment, and there's tons of different assessment tools that you can use, but I think the most important aspect of your pre-assessment is getting instant feedback and instant data so that you can immediately group your students based on the results from the pre-assessment. So there's two tools that I think are great for this. There's SoccerTip and there's Plickers. With this lesson, I used SoccerTip, and you'll see the little boy on the left, he's taking a SoccerTip quiz on his device. Jess used Plickers, and you see the kids on the right holding the cards. They used Plickers for her pre-assessment. So I'm going to go over both those tools. With SoccerTip, it's a free website where teachers can log on and create quizzes for their students to take. The screencast that you're seeing now is what it looks like for a student's point of view. The student enters a room code that's given to them by their teacher, and then they enter their name, and then they immediately start taking the quiz. Teachers can create SoccerTip quizzes. They can create multiple choice questions, short answer questions, true/false questions, and then once they finish creating the quiz, they give their students the room code so that the students can take it. Once the students complete the quiz on SoccerTip, it allows you to download results, and it gives you options for results that you'll see up top. It gives you individual student reports. It'll give you an Excel sheet of your class results, or it'll give you a breakdown for each question and what each student did for that question, answered for that question. So the Excel sheet I have here is the one that was from the nickel pre-assessment, and immediately I'm able to see which students need more help than others. So I was immediately able to group my students for the stations, which is really nice to get that immediate feedback. Jess used Plickers, and Plickers is great for classrooms that don't have access to the technology. Plickers, all you need is a set of the cards that you see the kids holding on the left and your smartphone to download the Plickers app. So with Plickers, teachers can create multiple choice questions for students to answer. Students hold their cards a certain way depending on what answer they want to choose, and the teacher scans their cards with her smartphone, and it gives her immediate results. So each card is assigned to a particular student, so it gives you individual results for what they answered, and that way you can use those. So after the pre-assessment, I had my students separate into stations, and I grouped them based on the pre-assessment, so they would be in different groups. So I had 4 different groups. The stations were Wiki, an apple bump game, a nickel game, and my small group. Apple bump is a game that practices skip counting by 5s, and I chose to play this game with this lesson because counting nickels is essentially just counting by 5, so I think it was important for the students to practice skip counting. So how the game works is the students take turns rolling 2 dice, they put those 2 numbers together, and then they count by 5s that many times. And whatever number they come up with, they cover that number on their board. This nickel game helps students understand that 5 pennies are equivalent to 1 nickel. So what the students do is they take turns rolling a dice that's labeled from 1 to 3, and they collect that many pennies. And once they get to 5 pennies, they can trade in their pennies and get 1 nickel. So by the end of the game, whoever has the most nickels wins. My small groups were all different. I differentiated based on the results from the pre-assessment and what they needed. Some students needed to practice just counting nickels. Some students were ready to practice counting nickels and pennies together. So it all depends on what I think that they needed and what their scores showed from the pre-assessment. So the small group changes based on the group. The last station was Wiki, and I created this Wiki to help students practice identifying nickels and counting them. On this first page, this little girl is circling the nickels she can find on the page. On the following pages, she practices counting nickels, dragging nickels to make a certain amount, and then eventually counting nickels and pennies. So at the end of the lesson, after we were done stations, I gave the students a post-assessment, and it was the exact same SoccerTip quiz that they took as their pre-assessment. This way I can see the growth from beginning to end and see which students were able to get a higher score on the post-assessment. It also showed me that what I needed to focus on the following day. So for example, I see that a few students still need help with adding nickels and pennies together. So the following day I might spend some time in small group with those students to give them a little extra practice. I think it's important to choose wisely when it comes to flipping. I would never flip a lesson on two-digit addition with my first graders because I know that's a really tough skill for them and it's something that's brand new to most of them. But I chose to flip this nickel lesson because we count money in calendar math every day, so I know that they've had a little practice with counting money, so I was more comfortable with flipping this lesson. I don't think it's appropriate to flip lessons that you know are going to be really challenging for students. I think those challenging lessons, you still need that whole group instruction and you still need the teacher there delivering the lecture. But for lessons like the nickel, they already have a little experience with it, so I was more comfortable flipping that lesson. So I think it's important to pick the right lessons to flip. You obviously don't need to flip every lesson every day, but choose the right ones that you want to flip. To get more information and ideas about flipping your classroom, you can visit inclassflip.weebly.com.